The morning sun spilled through the wide windows of Mary Hamilton's Chicago apartment, casting golden streaks across the hardwood floor. She stood by the kitchen counter, her hands trembling slightly as she poured hot water over a sprig of chamomile. At 28, 5 months pregnant, she felt a quiet joy bubbling inside her. A fragile, precious thing she hadn't dared to name until now. Her swollen belly pressed against the edge of the counter, and she rested a hand there, feeling the faint flutter of life beneath her skin. David, her husband, slipped up behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist. His lips brushed her shoulder, warm and steady. "You're gonna be the best mom, you know that?" he murmured, his voice a soft anchor in the stillness. Mary smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Mom called this morning," she said, stirring the tea with a spoon that clinked too loudly against the mug. "She's picked a place for the baby shower. Blue Sky, that fancy restaurant downtown. I didn't think they'd care this much." David's grip tightened for a split second, his brow furrowing. "I don't trust them, Mary," he said, stepping back to lean against the counter, arms crossed. "Your folks have never been fair to you. Not once." She turned to face him, the sunlight catching the faint lines of exhaustion on her face. "They're trying now," she said, almost pleading. "Maybe this is their way of showing they're happy for me." But even as she spoke, her mind drifted back to a version of herself she'd buried deep. She was 22, sitting at her childhood desk, a letter of acceptance to a study abroad program clutched in her hand. Her mother's voice echoed through the memory. "Mary's strong. She'll be fine." Fine meant staying home, abandoning her dreams to care for Caitlin, her frail older sister who'd been the family's fragile centerpiece since they were kids. Fine meant working late nights in real estate, sending money home while her parents fawned over Caitlin's every cough and sigh. Fine meant pretending she didn't ache every time they overlooked her. David watched her, his dark eyes narrowing as if he could see the ghosts swirling in her head. "They've taken too much from you already," he said, his tone sharp with an edge of anger she rarely heard. "And that thing your mom said, about Caitlin deserving a kid before you? That's messed up, Mary. You don't owe them this." Her breath caught, a shard of pain slicing through her chest. She told him that in a weak moment, a confession slipped out over wine one night. Her mother's quiet, cutting words after Mary announced her pregnancy. "Caitlin should have had a child first. She's earned it." Earned it how? Mary had wanted to scream. By being sick. By being their favorite. But she'd swallowed it down like always. The tea steamed in her hands, forgotten as she stared out the window at the Chicago skyline. A city of steel and glass, cold and unyielding, just like the family she'd spent her life trying to please. She wanted to believe this baby shower was a turning point, a sign they'd finally see her. But deep down, a whisper of doubt gnawed at her, a shadow she couldn't shake. 2 months earlier, Caitlin had announced her own pregnancy, and the Hamilton house had erupted in joy. Robert and Elizabeth, her parents, had practically glowed, fussing over Caitlin like she was a fragile saint. Mary had stood in the corner of their living room, her own news still a secret, watching her mother stroke Caitlin's hair and her father promise to build a crib. When Mary finally told them, their smiles had faltered, just for a second but long enough to carve a wound. "That's wonderful, honey," Elizabeth had said, her voice flat, her eyes darting back to Caitlin. Robert had clapped her shoulder, distracted, muttering something about good timing. Good timing for who? Now 6 months into her pregnancy, Mary felt the weight of it all pressing down. She'd downplayed her own joy, tiptoeing around Caitlin's fragile hope, afraid to outshine her sister. But then came the call that shattered everything. David had been at work when her phone rang, Caitlin's name flashing on the screen. Her sister's voice was a broken thread. "I lost it, Mary. The baby's gone." Mary had rushed to the hospital, her heart pounding, her own belly a quiet ache she tried to ignore. She found Caitlin in a sterile white room, curled up on the bed, her face pale and hollow. Robert and Elizabeth sat beside her, their heads bowed, their hands clasped tight. Mary stepped forward, her voice soft. "I'm here, Kate. I'm so sorry." Caitlin didn't look up. "Don't pretend you care," she snapped, her words a knife. Mary froze, her hand hovering midair. Elizabeth's head jerked up, her eyes red-rimmed but cold. "Enough, Mary," she said, her tone slicing through the room. "This isn't the time to parade your belly around." The air sucked out of Mary's lungs, her vision blurring with tears. She stumbled back, the sting of rejection burning her throat. She'd wanted to scream, to beg them to see her, but instead she turned and fled, the hospital's fluorescent lights buzzing in her ears. Outside, the rain came down in sheets, soaking her thin jacket as she staggered to her car. Her stomach cramped, a sharp jolt that made her gasp and clutch the door handle. She sank to her knees on the wet pavement, the cold seeping into her bones. "Please, baby," she whispered, her voice lost in the storm. "Stay with me." David found her there an hour later, drenched and trembling. He pulled her into his arms, his voice breaking as he shouted over the rain, "You can't keep letting them hurt you like this, Mary. You're killing yourself for them." She clung to him, sobbing into his chest, the rain mixing with her tears. "They're my family," she choked out. "I don't know how to stop." David's truck roared through the rain-slicked streets of Chicago, the wipers slashing at the downpour as he gripped the wheel with white knuckles. Mary sat beside him, her soaked jacket clinging to her skin, her hands pressed tight against her belly. The cramp had eased, but the ache lingered, a dull, gnawing fear she couldn't shake. "They don't deserve you," David said, his voice low and fierce, cutting through the hum of the engine. "Not after that. Not after anything." Mary stared out the window, the city lights blurring into streaks of gold and gray. "I just wanted to be there for her," she whispered, her breath fogging the glass. "For all of them." Back at the apartment, she peeled off her wet clothes and sank onto the couch, a blanket draped over her shoulders. David knelt in front of her, his hands cupping her face. "You're not their punching bag, Mary," he said, his eyes searching hers. "You've given them everything, your time, your money, your dreams. And they throw it back in your face like it's nothing." She nodded, tears spilling over, but the words wouldn't come. She saw Caitlin's hollow stare, her mother's sharp rebuke, her father's silence, all of it replaying like a broken record in her mind. "I thought they'd be happy for me," she finally said, her voice cracking. "For us." David pulled her close, his shirt damp against her cheek. "They should be," he murmured. "But they're too blind to see it." The next few weeks crawled by in a haze of tension. Mary avoided her parents' calls, letting them pile up on her voicemail like unanswered prayers. Caitlin didn't reach out, and the silence from her sister stung worse than any words could. Mary tried to focus on the baby, picking out tiny clothes, sketching nursery ideas, but the joy felt tainted, shadowed by the rift she couldn't mend. Then one gray afternoon her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "We've planned your baby shower. Blue sky, Saturday 2 p.m. Be there." Mary's heart leapt, a flicker of hope igniting despite everything. "Maybe they're trying," she told David, clutching the phone like a lifeline. He frowned, unconvinced. "Or maybe they're just saving face," he said. "Don't get your hopes up too high." Saturday arrived with a crisp spring breeze, the kind that promised new beginnings. Mary stood in front of the mirror, smoothing the light blue maternity dress over her belly. The fabric shimmered in the sunlight, matching the faint sparkle in her eyes. She wanted to believe this was it, the moment her family would finally embrace her happiness. David watched from the doorway, his jaw tight. "You look beautiful," he said, forcing a smile. "Just be careful, okay?" She nodded, kissing him softly before heading out. "I'll be fine," she promised, though her voice wavered. Blue sky loomed ahead, a sleek tower of glass and steel in Chicago's River North district. Mary parked her car, her heart thudding as she stepped onto the bustling sidewalk. The restaurant's elegance hit her like a wave, crystal chandeliers glinting overhead, white tablecloths crisp and pristine. She murmured to herself, "What a place," a mix of awe and unease curling in her chest. For years she'd been the afterthought, the strong one who didn't need fussing over. This sudden attention felt foreign, almost too good to be true. "Reservation for Hamilton?" she asked the hostess, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. The woman smiled warmly. "Yes, for a baby shower. We've been expecting you. This way, please." Mary followed her down a quiet hallway, the chatter of the main dining room fading behind her. She rested a hand on her belly, feeling the baby kick, a tiny reassurance amid the storm of nerves. The hostess stopped at a decorated door, her smile widening. "Congratulations," she said, then stepped aside. Mary took a deep breath, her fingers trembling as they brushed the handle. She pictured her parents' proud faces, Caitlin's tentative smile, a room full of love waiting to greet her. With a surge of anticipation, she pushed the door open. Her smile froze. The room wasn't empty, not like she'd feared, but it wasn't the celebration she'd dreamed of either. Robert, Elizabeth, and Caitlin stood there, rigid as statues, their faces carved from stone. No balloons, no gifts, no warmth. Just a single table in the center, bare except for a white envelope. Mary's stomach dropped, the air thickening around her. "What's this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, though it echoed in the silence. Robert stepped forward, his eyes hard and unyielding. "Sit down, Mary," he said, his tone clipped like he was issuing an order. She didn't move, her legs rooted to the floor. Elizabeth turned away, her shoulders trembling, while Caitlin stared at her with something dark and jagged in her gaze. Anger, grief, maybe both. "We need to talk," Robert continued, his voice rising. "About what you've done to this family." Mary's breath hitched, her hand tightening on her belly as the baby kicked again, harder this time. "What I've done?" she repeated, disbelief cracking her voice. "I've been here for you, all of you, every step of the way." Elizabeth spun around, tears streaming down her face. "Don't you dare play the victim," she snapped. "You waltz in here with that belly, acting like everything's fine while Caitlin's world falls apart. You don't know what it's like to lose a child." The words hit like a slap and Mary staggered back, her vision swimming. "I didn't take anything from her," she said, her voice rising with desperation. "I wanted her to be happy too." Caitlin lunged forward, her face twisted with rage. "If you hadn't flaunted it, your perfect little life, maybe my baby would still be here," she screamed, her hands shaking. "You stole my chance, Mary." Mary's knees buckled, but she caught herself on the edge of the table, her chest heaving. "Stole it," she choked out. "I've given up everything for you, for all of you. My dreams, my time, my—" She stopped, tears burning her eyes as the weight of years crashed down. Robert slammed the envelope onto the table, cutting her off. "Enough," he barked. "You don't get to be happy when we're suffering. This ends now." He tore the envelope open, pulling out a letter and a stack of papers. "We're done with you, Mary," he said, his voice cold as steel. "You're no longer our daughter. And this," he shoved the papers toward her, "is what you owe us, $380,000. Every cent we spent raising you, educating you, keeping you alive. Pay it back, then get out of our lives." The room spun, the chandelier's light fracturing into 1,000 jagged pieces. Mary stared at the invoice, the numbers blurring through her tears. Kindergarten fees, college tuition, food costs, all itemized like she was a debt to be collected. Her baby kicked again, a sharp jolt that snapped her back. With trembling hands, she grabbed the letter and ripped it in half, the sound tearing through the silence. "You're the ones who owe me," she shouted, her voice raw and wild. "You've taken everything I had and you still want more?" She stumbled toward the door, her breath coming in gasps. Robert called after her, "Don't you dare walk away." But she didn't stop. The hallway stretched endlessly before her, the walls closing in. Her belly cramped again, fiercer this time, and she collapsed against the wall, sliding to the floor. "Please, baby," she sobbed, clutching her stomach. "Don't leave me now." Footsteps echoed behind her, restaurant staff rushing over, but all she heard was the faint, frantic thud of her baby's heartbeat fading into the dark. Mary stumbled through the apartment door, her blue maternity dress crumpled and streaked with tears. The echo of Blue Sky's sterile hallway still rang in her ears. Her father's cold ultimatum, her mother's sobs, Caitlin's venomous accusations. She dropped her purse on the floor, the torn pieces of that hateful letter spilling out like confetti from a nightmare. David rushed to her side, his face paling as he took in her trembling frame. "Mary, what happened?" he demanded, his voice tight with dread. She couldn't answer, couldn't find the words. She just sank onto the couch, her hands clutching her belly as if she could shield her baby from the wreckage of her family. "They disowned me," she finally choked out, her voice a raw, broken thing. "They said I don't deserve to be happy, not while Caitlin's suffering. And then they handed me this invoice. $380,000. Like I'm some debt they're calling in." David's eyes widened, then narrowed with fury. He snatched the scattered papers from the floor, scanning the itemized list. School fees, groceries, doctor visits, every penny of her childhood tallied up like a bill from a stranger. "This is insane," he growled, crumpling the pages in his fist. "They can't do this to you. Not after everything." Mary shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. They already did, she whispered. They stood there, all three of them, and told me I'm nothing to them. Caitlin said I killed her baby, just by existing, by being pregnant. Mom couldn't even look at me. And Dad, her voice broke, a sob tearing free. He said I owe them my life. David pulled her into his arms, his shirt soaking up her tears, but she could feel the anger radiating off him, a storm brewing beneath his calm exterior. We're done with them, he said, his tone final. You don't need this poison, Mary. You've got me, you've got our baby. That's enough. She wanted to believe him, wanted to let go, but the weight of betrayal clung to her like damp fog. That night she barely slept, her mind replaying every sacrifice she'd made, every late shift, every cancelled plan, every dollar sent home to keep her family afloat. By morning, a quiet resolve had settled in her bones. She dragged herself to the study, pulling an old cardboard box from the closet labeled family papers. David watched from the doorway, confusion creasing his brow. What are you doing? He asked as she tore the lid open. Proving they're wrong, she said, her voice steady for the first time in days. She started pulling out documents, bank statements, payment receipts, handwritten notes, all evidence of the life she'd poured into her family. $50,000 for Caitlin's medical bills after a surgery 5 years back. $120,000 to cover her father's failed investments when the bank nearly took their house. $30,000 for her mother's physical therapy after a car accident. The numbers stacked up, a mountain of proof that she'd been their lifeline, not their burden. David knelt beside her, his jaw dropping as he flipped through the pages. You paid for all this? He asked, incredulous. And they never knew? Dad made me keep it quiet, she said, her fingers tracing a faded receipt. He said it was for the family's honor. I was so stupid, David. I thought I was helping. Her voice cracked, but she kept going, driven by a fire she hadn't felt in years. Then her phone buzzed, shattering the silence. She glanced at the screen. Sarah, an old friend from her banking days. Her stomach twisted as she answered. Hey Sarah, what's up? Sarah's voice was hushed, urgent. Mary, I found something in the archives. You need to hear this. Your dad, he didn't just take your money. He took out a loan, $200,000, under your name. Forged your signature to mortgage that first apartment you bought. Said it was to save his company, but he never paid it back. The room tilted, the phone slipping from Mary's hand. David caught it, his face darkening as he put it on speaker. What? He barked. When was this? 5 years ago, Sarah said, her tone heavy with guilt. I only saw it now, cross-checking old files. Mary, the bank's about to foreclose on that place. I'm so sorry, I didn't know. The call ended, leaving a deafening silence. Mary stared at the papers in her lap, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Then it hit her, a scream ripped from her throat, primal and ragged. She grabbed a framed photo from the desk, her family smiling at a picnic years ago, and hurled it against the wall. Glass shattered, scattering like her broken trust. They didn't just disown me, she sobbed, collapsing into David's arms. They stole from me. My apartment, my future. Everything I built, they took it. David held her tight, his voice shaking with rage. They're monsters, he said. How could they do this to their own daughter? Mary's tears soaked his shirt, but beneath the pain something shifted, a spark of defiance igniting in her chest. She pulled back, wiping her face with trembling hands. I'm done crying, she said, her voice low and fierce. They don't get to win. She turned back to the box, her movements frantic now, pulling out more evidence. Every transfer, every secret payment. $670,000, she muttered, tallying it up as David watched in stunned silence. That's what I gave them over 10 years. And they have the nerve to say I owe them. Her eyes burned with a mix of fury and clarity. She grabbed a notebook and started writing, her pen slashing across the page. What are you doing? David asked, his voice soft but urgent. Sending them an invoice, she said, her jaw set. Not for money, for the truth. They need to see what they've done to me. She wrote fast, her words spilling out like a flood. To Robert, Elizabeth and Caitlin, here's my bill. $670,000 for the life I gave you. Dad's debts, Mom's therapy, Caitlin's treatments. I paid it all and you repaid me with this. I'm not your bank anymore. I'm not your daughter anymore. She paused, her hand shaking, then added, "This isn't about cash. It's about what I'm worth. More than you'll ever know." David squeezed her shoulder, his eyes shining with pride and pain. "You sure about this?" he asked. She nodded, sealing the envelope with a trembling hand. "They've taken enough," she said. "Now it's my turn to take something back." She stood, the weight of the envelope heavy in her grip, and headed for the door. The fight wasn't over. Not yet. Mary stood at the mailbox outside their Chicago apartment, the cold metal biting into her palm as she clutched the envelope. The ink on the address, her parents' house, stared back at her, a final tether to a family that had torn her apart. Inside was her invoice. $670,000, a ledger of her silent sacrifices, a demand not for money but for recognition. Her breath fogged in the crisp evening air, her belly heavy with 8 months of life. She hesitated, her fingers trembling, then shoved the envelope through the slot. It dropped with a soft thud, a sound that echoed in her chest like a door slamming shut. She turned back to David, waiting by the steps, his eyes steady with unspoken support. "It's done," she said, her voice a mix of relief and dread. "How we wait." That night her phone buzzed relentlessly, texts from Caitlin lighting up the screen like warning flares. "I know everything now," the first one read. "Dad told me about the money. I hate you for this, but I hate myself more." Mary's heart lurched, her thumb hovering over the call button. She dialed, her pulse racing, but the line rang out to voicemail, Caitlin's voice a ghost. "Leave a message." She tried again, then again, panic clawing at her throat. "Pick up, Kate," she whispered, pacing the living room. David grabbed her shoulders, his grip firm. "What's going on?" he asked, alarm creeping into his tone. "She's not answering," Mary said, her voice breaking. "She said she hates me and herself. What if she—" She couldn't finish, the image flashing unbidden. Caitlin on a bridge, the dark water below, her fragile sister unraveling under the weight of guilt. David pulled her close, his breath warm against her hair. "She's upset, not gone," he said, though his eyes betrayed his own fear. "You did what you had to. This isn't on you." But Mary's mind spun, the silence from Caitlin a deafening roar. She sank onto the couch, staring at the phone, willing it to ring, her baby kicking restlessly as if sensing her turmoil. Across town, the Hamilton house was a battlefield of shattered illusions. Robert sat at the kitchen table, the envelope from Mary open before him, its contents spread like a confession. Elizabeth stood over him, her hands shaking as she read the invoice aloud. $120,000 for your debts, Robert. $50,000 for Caitlin's surgery. $30,000 for my therapy. Her voice cracked, rising to a scream. "You told me you handled it. You said we were fine." Robert buried his face in his hands, his shoulders slumping. "I couldn't admit I failed," he muttered. "Mary offered to help and I let her. I didn't want you to know." Caitlin burst into the room, her eyes wild, clutching her phone. "She paid for everything?" she shouted, snatching the papers from her mother. "My treatments, the house, everything I thought you gave me, it was her?" She turned on Robert, tears streaming down her face. "You lied to me. You let me blame her." Elizabeth grabbed her arm, sobbing. "We didn't know, Caitlin. We thought—" Caitlin yanked free, her voice a raw howl. "You thought she was nothing. And now she's gone because of us." She stormed out, slamming the door, leaving her parents in stunned silence. Days later, Mary stood in the kitchen, the weight of her pregnancy pulling at her every step. She stirred a pot of soup, the steam rising in lazy curls, trying to find some shred of normalcy. David was at work, the apartment quiet except for the hum of the stove. Then it hit, a sharp, searing pain in her abdomen like a knife twisting deep. The ladle slipped from her hand, clattering to the floor as soup splashed across the tiles. She gasped, doubling over, her hands flying to her belly. "No," she breathed, terror flooding her veins. "Not now, baby, please." She stumbled toward the counter, reaching for her phone, but another wave of pain buckled her knees. She fell, her shoulder slamming into the cabinet, a cry tearing from her throat. Blood trickled down her leg, warm and horrifying, pooling on the floor. "Stay with me," she sobbed, crawling toward the phone, her fingers slipping on the tiles. Her vision blurred, the room spinning, but she kept moving, driven by a mother's desperate instinct. She grabbed the phone, dialing David with shaking hands. "Help me," she whispered as it rang, her voice fading. I'm losing her. The call dropped, her strength failing, and she collapsed, her cheek pressed to the cold floor, the baby's kicks growing faint. Hours later, or maybe minutes, time lost all meaning. The front door crashed open. Robert's voice cut through the haze. Harry. He stood in the doorway, Elizabeth and Caitlin behind him, their faces pale with shock. They'd come unannounced, driven by Caitlin's frantic plea. If she's hurt, I'll never forgive us. Robert dropped to his knees beside her, his hands hovering over her still form. Oh God, Mary, no, he choked out, tears spilling down his face. What have we done? Elizabeth fell beside him, her sobs echoing in the small space. My baby, I'm so sorry. Caitlin fumbled with her phone, dialing 911, her voice trembling. Please hurry, she's bleeding, she's pregnant, she's my sister. She knelt by Mary, brushing hair from her sweat-soaked forehead. I need you, Mary, she cried. I was wrong about everything. Don't leave me. The room filled with the sound of their grief, a family broken and pleading, but Mary didn't stir, her breaths shallow, her baby's fate hanging by a thread. Sirens wailed in the distance as paramedics stormed in, shoving the family aside. They lifted Mary onto a stretcher, her limp body a stark contrast to the chaos around her. David burst through the door just as they wheeled her out, his face a mask of terror. Harry, he shouted, lunging forward, but a medic held him back. She's in labor. Severe bleeding, the paramedic barked. We're taking her now. The ambulance doors slammed shut, the red lights flashing through the rain as it sped away. In the hospital, the operating room was a blur of white coats and beeping machines. David paced outside, his fists clenched, while Robert, Elizabeth, and Caitlin huddled in the waiting area, their faces etched with guilt. A doctor emerged, his expression grim. She's hemorrhaging, he said, his voice clipped. The baby's in distress. Low oxygen. We can only save one. David's knees buckled, his scream tearing through the sterile hall. Save them both, he roared, grabbing the doctor's coat. I'm begging you, don't make me choose. The monitor's beeps slowed, each one a dagger in their hearts. Inside, Mary lay unconscious, her life slipping away as the surgeons fought to stem the blood. David sank to the floor, sobbing into his hands, while Caitlin clutched her mother, whispering, "This is our fault." Robert stared at the wall, his voice a hollow rasp. I killed her. My pride killed her. The seconds stretched into eternity, the family suspended in a nightmare, waiting for a miracle, or a loss they'd never survive. The hospital waiting room was a tomb of silence, broken only by the faint hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional sob that escaped Elizabeth's lips. David sat slumped in a plastic chair, his hands stained with Mary's blood from when he'd tried to hold her before the paramedics took over. His eyes were red, hollow, staring at the double doors where they'd wheeled her away. Robert stood by the window, his reflection a ghost in the glass, his fists clenched as if he could fight the guilt eating him alive. Caitlin paced, her phone clutched tight, muttering to herself, "She has to be okay. She has to." The doctor's words hung over them like a death sentence. We can only save one. No one spoke, but the air was thick with their shared terror. Mary or the baby, a choice none of them could bear. Hours later, or maybe it was minutes, time had lost all meaning. The doors swung open. A nurse stepped out, her face unreadable, and David shot to his feet, his voice a desperate rasp. Is she alive? Tell me she's alive. The nurse nodded, slow and deliberate. She made it through surgery. The baby too, a girl. But it was close. She lost a lot of blood and, she hesitated, her eyes softening with pity. She won't be able to have more children. The damage was too severe. David's knees buckled, relief and grief crashing into him at once. He sank back into the chair, tears streaming down his face. They're alive, he whispered, a broken prayer. That's all that matters. Robert turned from the window, his voice trembling. Can we see her? The nurse shook her head. She's stable but unconscious. Family can visit tomorrow if she improves. Caitlin stepped forward, her eyes blazing through her tears. She's my sister. I need to see her now. The nurse held firm. Tomorrow, she repeated, then walked away, leaving them to drown in their regret. Elizabeth collapsed into Robert's arms, sobbing. We did this to her, she wailed. We pushed her to this. Robert held her, his own tears falling silently. It's my fault, he said, his voice a hollow echo. My pride, my lies, I nearly killed her. Caitlin sank to the floor, clutching the invoice Mary had sent, the one that had unraveled their world. She gave us everything, she whispered, tracing the numbers with shaking fingers. And we threw her away. I threw her away. She looked up at her parents, her voice rising. You told me she was selfish, that she didn't care. But it was me, I was the selfish one. Robert knelt beside her, his hand hovering over her shoulder. We were all wrong, he said, choking on the words. I made her hide it, every dollar she gave us. I told her it was for our honor, but it was for my ego. And now, he couldn't finish, the weight of his confession crushing him. Days later, Mary woke in a sterile hospital bed, the beep of monitors a steady rhythm in her ears. David sat beside her, holding her hand, his face etched with exhaustion and love. A tiny bundle lay in a crib nearby. Emma, their daughter, swaddled in white, her chest rising with soft breaths. Mary's eyes fluttered open, meeting David's, and a weak smile curved her lips. She's here, she whispered, her voice fragile but alive. David nodded, tears spilling over. You both are, he said, kissing her forehead. I thought I'd lost you. She squeezed his hand, her strength returning in small, defiant bursts. You didn't, she said. We made it. But the peace was short-lived. Mary made a choice. No contact with her family, not yet. She told David, her voice firm despite the pain. They don't get to walk in like nothing happened. I need time. He nodded, understanding, and they moved, quietly, quickly, to a new apartment across the city, leaving no forwarding address. A letter from her lawyer arrived at her parents' house a week later. Mary is safe and healing. She requests no contact for now. Respect her wishes. She and the baby are healthy. Attached was a photo. Mary by the sea, her belly gone, Emma in her arms, a faint smile on her face. David stood beside her, protective and proud. Robert, Elizabeth, and Caitlin stared at it, tears staining the paper, a silent vow forming in their hearts. They'd wait, they'd change, they'd earn her back. 3 years passed, a slow crawl of healing and rebuilding. Mary stood in her new living room, sunlight streaming through the windows, arranging a vase of daisies on the table. Emma, now too, toddled in, her golden curls bouncing, her blue eyes, Mary's eyes, sparkling with mischief. Grandma and Grandpa coming? She chirped, clutching a crayon drawing of a lopsided family. Mary smiled, a real smile this time, though it carried the weight of scars. Yes, baby, she said, scooping her up. They're coming today. The doorbell rang and David opened it, revealing Robert, Elizabeth, and Caitlin on the threshold, their faces tense with hope and fear. They held flowers, a small gift for Emma, their hands trembling as they stepped inside. Mary took a deep breath, her heart pounding, and faced them. Robert dropped to his knees, his voice breaking. Mary, I'm so sorry. I let my pride destroy us, destroy you. I'll spend my life making it right. Elizabeth reached for her, tears streaming. We were blind, honey. We didn't see you until it was almost too late. Caitlin stepped closer, her eyes red. I was jealous, Mary. I blamed you when I should have thanked you. I just want to be your sister again. Mary stood still, her gaze steady but guarded. I forgive you, she said, her voice clear, but I won't forget. We start over, slowly on my terms. For Emma, for me. Emma ran forward, hugging Robert's legs, and the room erupted in soft, tearful laughter, a fragile, beautiful sound. They sat together, sipping tea under the spring sun, the past a shadow but not a chain. Later, on the deck beneath a starry sky, David asked quietly, What's a real family, Mary? She thought for a moment, then said, It's people who face their mistakes, who fight to rebuild, who love through the pain. We're getting there. This story isn't just about loss. It's about what we owe each other, not in dollars but in truth. Mary gave everything only to be betrayed, yet she found strength to reclaim her worth. It's a reminder that family can break you, but it can also heal if you're brave enough to demand honesty. So I ask you, can you forgive someone who's hurt you that deeply? Would you give them a second chance or walk away forever? Leave your thoughts below. I read everyone. And if this moved you, hit that subscribe button. Join us for more stories that cut to the heart. We're building something real here together.